All right, I think we're live. Yes, we are. Woo! Thanks for joining us once again. I'm Sammy K. Powers, and this is the PHP Roundtable. This is a live podcast of developers discussing topics that PHP nerds care about. And the ultimate goal of this podcast is to learn a little something from each other. If you're listening live and want to be a part of the show, send a tweet to PHP Roundtable with a question or a comment, and we'll try to address it on the show if we can. Sometimes I actually forget to do that, to look at the Twitter stream. So I know last week there was a bunch of activity on Twitter, and I totally didn't even bring much of it in. So I'll try to be more aware of that today. So thanks for joining us live. It wasn't all that long ago that the correct way to cut up a design in HTML was to use tables for everything, the table layouts. Those days are long gone, unless, of course, you're cutting up an email template. But today, we wouldn't even think about cutting up a site without CSS positioning. Huge paradigm shifts like this happen all the time in web development, and if we're not careful, we could get left behind and become irrelevant very quickly. Today, we're chatting with some web developers to see what they do in order to stay relevant in the web development ever-changing world. So without any particular order going on here, let's meet our guests. First, we have the guy behind mastersandframework.com and host of the Free the Geek podcast, Matthew Setter. Welcome, Matthew.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We also have Andy Huggins, who is fighting the good fight of trying to stay relevant. Welcome, Andy.
Hey.
And we have Henning Glatter-Götz. Glatter-Götz. Yes, Glatter-Götz?
Glatter-Götz.
Glatter-Götz. Oh man, I said it right before going live, but I didn't say it right after going live. But he's the back-end developer dabbling in single-page application development with Ember.js and the JSON API specification. Podcaster of a billion different podcasts. Welcome, Henning.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And finally, we have Tom Oram. He's the He's been professionally developing for 15 plus years and is an advocate of TDD, BDD, and anything that ends in DD. Welcome, Tom.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Let's kick this thing off by, I just wanted to see what you guys, you've been doing web development for a while, and I wanted to see, can you tell me a moment where the way that you were doing things was, you realized one day it was like the wrong way of doing it. Or suddenly wait a minute, how come everybody else is doing this totally different way? Why aren't we designing with tables anymore?
Well, for me, it was actually a little bit before I got into web development. It was the realization that not doing unit testing is a very, very bad and expensive thing. So I spent a lot of time basically in the cubicle of the QA guys, or in the cubicles of the QA guys, when we had shipped, a pre-release, and then my team lead at the time sort of suggested that I check out unit testing, and I was very, very junior at the time, and so I started doing that. And the next iteration, which was 6 months later, I basically, was not over in the QA department anymore, and they noticed that, and then the rest of the team started doing the same thing. So that was a big realization for me.
Yeah, I'll jump in there as well because it's very similar for me. I spent quite a long time working. Well, being out in West Wales, I'm sort of quite remote, so there's not much in the way of user groups and things here. So it's only sort of the small team that I was working with here, or I'm still working with here. And we sort of knew that we wanted to be doing unit testing. We knew what we were kind of wanting to do with our sort of architectures and everything that we were building, and it was all sort of more or less there, but it was kind of a realization that actually, if we get this stuff tested and we kind of make sure that everything is sort of separated and very modular, then we can actually get stuff done without reaching those critical mass points where you've run out of brain power to keep hold of the crazy design that you're building. So yeah, very much unit testing, or all sorts of testing actually, and architecture. Really starting to understand the architecture and focusing on the kind of domain model rather than just trying to make a framework do what I wanted it to do really.
I think
For me,
oh, sorry. Go ahead.
for me, it was at a previous employer. I kind of noticed like we kept having the same problems over and over, and I kind of wanted to figure out ways to avoid those same problems. So that just made me start looking into other solutions and more architectural type stuff. So.
I think we all had sort of shared experience. I had mine sort of started a couple of years ago. Wow, I don't remember how many. And it was that similar experience. Like, there were problems reported with this app that I wrote, and it was always that. But that shouldn't have happened. Like, but why did that happen? And so, okay. And my boss was really sagely at the time and said, how about, because I was all flustered and I just was like, this shouldn't have happened and it should work. And so, from that experience came, chasing after sort of all kinds of testing. And this, I like to say, this thing here, this Kindle, has become my best friend. So.
Yes. Actually, I have mine handy as well, right here. I just bought a brand new replacement battery for it.
Okay.
Yeah. The Kindle is what you're going after, development books and stuff like that?
Yeah, I like the Kindle for the most, like the physical one, mainly for like a lot of reading. But when you get into what was it like refactoring or books with like lots of code snippets in them, it's not the best. So the iPad comes in handy for stuff like that. But either way, it's just Kindle because it's always there. You can sync it across everything. Have a book on the go.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's actually one of the questions I was going to ask is, how are some of the ways that you guys feel that are really helpful for you to kind of stay relevant and not get left behind when technologies are changing and tools are changing?
I know. I'd definitely say something like definitely having like some kind of reader available, so that way you're not having to cart a lot of books and so forth around. And maybe something like Reader or the like the feed app, so you can sort of, if someone mentions something, you can get that person's feed and then get recommendations of books or ebooks or whatever that they have. So that'd be my first thing. So you can always have something on the go, and it's always really flexible.
Yeah, I'm also really remote, and so actually talking to real people is face to face is a big effort for me to go to user groups and things like that. But podcast is actually one of the things where I get my sort of the current news of the industry, and that's, I find, really, really helpful, because that's even easier than having books on the go. Is because if you're driving or something like that, or if you're walking somewhere, you can just listen to whatever's in your feed and get sort of the latest information, and not necessarily really in-depth stuff, but at least you learn about things that are going on, and you could then later on follow up on that and either get a book or read other things about it.
I find Twitter being my sort of main source for just pointing me in the direction of things to look at, just sort of like following it daily, making sure that all the people that I follow on there are, really interesting people. And, when I see things, I either like them and, just come back and go through my likes and catch up on things, or, maybe pop them open in YouTube and add it to my watch later list, or add a bookmark to a blog post or something like that. But I just find the sort of speed of Twitter, as in the rate of things going up there, means that there's always something interesting to find, and as time goes on, I guess then I get more locked into certain blogs, people that I find myself returning to, and then they become something that I have as a regular bookmark or something like that.
I use Twitter a lot too. Do you have some sort of advice for filtering out the noise? Because the noise level is extremely high, I find, and you can sort of start chasing your tail with that, because there's so much information. How do you deal with that?
I don't really have a specific way to filter out the noise. I've tried using lists, but even if you put things, people in lists that do keep quite on point with things, they also do post quite a lot of just other stuff about their social lives or whatever it might be. So There is quite a lot of noise. I do scroll down a lot through things, but I guess what I do is I just kind of add things to a list. So as I'm scrolling down through it, I'm just adding things to lists. I check it quite regularly. I scroll through it quite quickly, sort of scanning it, and just every time I see something that looks interesting, that I like it, like I say, and that's like a bookmark then, or extract it elsewhere. But the having some intelligent Twitter reader that would filter it would be great, but I've not found something like that.
Okay. I started using Nozzle. It's a service that you can basically hook your account up to, and it basically gives you sort of a consolidated, I guess, feed every day, and it basically gives you the things that were liked or retweeted by your friends the most, and it only does that with things that have links. So that's how I've sort of been able to filter things down a little more. But I just was wondering if there's other ways, better ways, because that's a big problem for me.
Yeah, I'm sure there probably are better ways, but I'm no expert really. I just like to read it, but I'll definitely give this Nozzle a try. It looks interesting.
Have you ever done the lazy tweet or the lazy web tweets where you're like, you have a question that you just want someone to answer for you real quick? You just tweet it with hashtag LazyWeb.
I've never done that. I don't have enough followers for those kind of things, I guess.
Well, it's funny that it was like 2 days ago. I tweeted. I asked like what people's favorite book or their top book for whatever made them become a better programmer. And it was great to see like all these people, like the books that had helped them, and the one that kept coming up over and over was Clean Code by Uncle Bob Martin, I think. So I've already read the intro and like maybe the first chapter or something, and I'm getting really excited about it. I'm like, oh man, this is like really resonating with me because I don't feel so bad about being so obsessed with getting like details right and obsessed with naming and obsessed with all these things. But I found myself when I'm programming, I sometimes get paralyzed by just knowing that there's probably a better way of doing this, and I like sit there and I'll like stare out the window thinking like, well, I could do it this way, but how could I do it better? And then I just like I want to like almost be perfect the first time I write it. And it's like, is this following the latest DD thing? Something TD, whatever DD. I know there's a DD out there to make this better. So what do you guys do to maybe overcome being paralyzed by just being overwhelmed by this constant flux of like, you got to do this new flashy thing and do it this new flashy way?
For me, like I always think of it as like a writer writing just like a story or whatever like they're trying to write, and the first time through they're just going to write their first draft. Like there's no way to have the perfect code the first time you write it, and then just like thinking about it like in terms of like a writer, I was always just like, all right, well, I don't have to be perfect. Like just get the first thing out there, get it working, and then come back to it. It's kind of always the way I looked at it.
Yeah, I think that's really hard to do, and I don't think it works the first time. One of my the people that I guess I would call him a mentor. He always said it takes pretty much three versions or 3 iterations of something to get it perfect. And the first one, you're just figuring out the domain problem anyway, and you're solving it somehow, and it's just put together somehow. And then in the second one, you improve it, and then the third one, you probably can take the time to do it right. But the problem is that you usually don't get to do that because the thing you're making has to pay bills, and nobody's going to pay for something that doesn't improve in quality, in regards to its output. It's just basically for you as the developer, which in the long term could be, for maintenance costs and stuff like that. But it's usually a really, really hard sell, I think.
I don't know. I was inspired by listening to Uncle Bob a lot, to be honest. In that sort of sagely thing of you can get caught up looking at the shiny, like it's shiny, it's new, so that's where I have to be. But like a lot of things, it's like, do you really? And maybe it's applicable for someone else, but is it applicable for you? But it can be hard, I think, because I think being in IT and certain other industries, you kind of like you're right in the middle of the stream, and that sort of you have to see this, you have to do this, and you kind of feel obliged. But maybe it's just getting older. I think it's just, I guess, having a bit of a filter, like, this isn't really applicable to me, so I'll just skip it. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe I realize later that that was a wrong call. So, you can, I guess, try and play catch up. But with so many things to focus on, so that's my spiel.
Well, I think Henning was saying with that you write it 3 times, nobody's going to pay you to do that. Well, if you think about the writer case, like a writer, if they write like a book or a story for like a newspaper, they have an editor that comes and reads it and then checks it. We're apparently expected to be the writer, the editor, and the publisher, and it's like, wait a minute, somebody else should look at this. I don't know, maybe that's why writing it 3 times wouldn't necessarily be that big a deal.
I don't think that writing it 3 times necessarily means that, or in my opinion anyway, that you have to rewrite the whole project or whatever you're working on 3 times, from the beginning. It's like, the first iteration that you write, certainly, I mean, even to the extent of small units, when you're doing unit testing, or TDD rather, you're throwing away a lot of the code that you write anyway. You write a bit of code, you write the next test, you throw away what you did and, replace it with the next thing. And if it's a long-term project, things sort of get rewritten several times anyway, just as you're kind of working through the process, rather than, exclusively going, right, we're going to stop this now and rewrite it. And yeah, sure, if you reapproach a project, start again, do something that you've written before, you'll write it quicker and better. But I think that, if you're working on a project long term, then, you kind of, every time you come to a bit of code and you work on it, you start kind of adding new layers of stuff to it. So, yeah, if you've got the luxury of working on it for a long time, maybe a shorter project, it's a different story. So if you're working on something that's got a short life, and it, or at least a short development life, and then, something, that there's not going to be further iterations of it or anything like that, then, sitting down and getting it absolutely perfect is going to be expensive, and, the benefits may not be worth it. So I guess for me, the more I do this work, the more that I feel that kind of mastery is actually understanding what's the right amount to do with things. So, when I'm teaching myself things, when I'm learning new things, I'll spend a lot of time doing things exactly right, and I'll question it. When I'm working on things, I'll be striving for that all the time. But depending on, various circumstances and, how important the piece of work that I'm working on is, will kind of make me, think, how much can I sort of slacken off from this, or how much can I, is there a quicker, more pragmatic approach to this? And so long as you've got the tests there, good test coverage, then, if you've done it an all right job, you can always make it better later on.
I think that's a really good point. You have to learn where to draw the line. And yeah, one of the things is I try to remember is don't gold plate it.
Yeah.
It works. It's fine. Move on.
I think that's to do things perfectly when you're doing learning. When you're actually sitting there going, I'm learning how to do something. That's vital to try and get it right and try and really understand the best way. When you're working, you shouldn't slack, but you should definitely approach it pragmatically. I think that's the kind of important thing.
I like a variation on Andrew's idea. I just finished reading a book called On Writing Well by William Zinsser. I think it's the 30th anniversary edition. Brilliant book. But the book, he talks about, it's like all forms of writing, but the same concepts, I think, can be applied to software, in that he said, you start with that original piece, but that's not what, in the example of writing, he said, what you see published in a newspaper or on a magazine isn't the first draft, or I'd be very doubtful it would be. You'd start with it and then approach it again maybe that afternoon or the next day, whatever, in a series of iterations, like say quite applicable to software, and look at it and say, okay, well that was good, but my thoughts didn't quite work well there, so we'll kind of restructure this and restructure that. So I'd take the analogy of not saying sort of throwing away, but, well, partly, but sort of slightly improving and slightly, forever adjusting bits and pieces until it sort of comes to be what you want, or at least something that you're happy to say, right, now we can make it better, but that's I'm okay with where it is.
I think you guys are all kind of hitting on the same nail there, and I think it's something that I've been really resonating with recently, and trying to think of my project, my code base as a continuum, and that with my first write of the code base, or the first iteration, like I'm going to get a little closer to perfect, and then I'm going to look back, I'm going to step back on that and say, okay, how I'm going to refactor this so that I can get a little closer to perfect, and then I get a little closer, and I with little tiny bits and pieces all throughout the code base, I refactor a little bit at a time, and just maybe allow myself to fully understand the domain of what it is that I'm actually trying to code. And I feel like I'm really excited after I finish clean code. I'm going to be reading Refactoring, Improving the Design of Existing Code by Martin Fowler. And I want that to be, I think that for me, I feel like the missing piece is thinking of refactoring as being just part of the development process, and that like it will always be there, and refactor even before you commit the first time or something. Like, I don't know, I'm going to play with different ways of just trying to make refactoring part of just like my mindset. Do you guys kind of feel like that's what you guys do with your code bases, like in the right context?
Yeah, definitely. I was actually giving a lot of thought to it on a code base I'm on at the moment. I think I'm a bit lucky because it's new, but I think this was an iteration of my own thinking, was that you would say do like a feature branch for something as small as possible, and then maybe you do a few of those, and then as you noticed something in the code itself, which isn't necessarily like a feature, but you say, hang on a second, that's kind of gone off, and that's potentially heading off into being mud. Okay, we'll come back around to that, and we'll kind of clean that up, so that developing and sort of cleaning at the same time is just part of that overall development process. So you hopefully, and it's just something I'm playing with, and Tom actually inspired me to get into this one without knowing it, I think. So you don't sort of hopefully get to the point where you say, wow, it's become such a big ball of mud, even though it was brand new. We'll have to set time aside to do that. It's kind of that little bit of development, a little bit of clean, a little bit of development, a little bit of clean, all the way. Hopefully, and that's. I hope it pans out.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, there are occasions where you have to actually, make time to do, have a refactoring push on maybe an old legacy project. But on the whole, those should be quite rare, really. I think, refactoring is just something you do. It's just part of the process. It doesn't stop, and it's always there, which I think is what Matt's saying there.
Yeah. And it seems like as we try to stay relevant and we learn new things, and we can, as we're refactoring as a normal part of our process, then it will be just natural that our better practices will get incorporated. And I think there's kind of like two sides of this staying relevant coin. I feel like there's sort of a timeless aspect and just improving yourself as a coder. Like these books I've mentioned, the clean coding and the refactoring ones, they're not new books. Like they've been around for a while. The refactoring one, just looked at the copyright, is 1999. And I'm thinking, man, 1999, the landscape of PHP back then was kind of abysmal. Like, how are these books still relevant? Whereas, like, the way we were doing it in 1999 was just awful. I feel like if we can maybe figure out a way to recognize what are the timeless things that improve me as a developer over time that will always be relevant, versus what's the new hotness tool that comes out that I should probably learn, and then it will get, it'll get replaced by the next new hotness tool.
Well, I think you kind of hinted at it there, right? I mean, you said the tools change all the time, and those are things that come and go, and then the better ones come out, and but it's sort of the fundamentals, and I guess refactoring is one of those things. Unit testing is one of those things. Patterns, algorithms, things like that. They are really, really old. Some of them. I mean, this functional programming thing that everybody's talking about now, that started back in like 80 or 90 years. It's extremely old, and those things tend to move very slowly. So I think those are the things that I buy actual books about, because they don't go out of date, right? They stay relevant. They're kind of timeless. Whereas the tools and all those things, frameworks, etc., I don't tend to buy books on that. I just get whatever's on the web, because 6 months from now, 12 months from now, that is either doesn't exist anymore or it's completely changed, right?
Yeah, I had a uni lecturer. Oh man, it's gone back years, and we were all really young, and we all thought like everything was wonderful, and we had this discussion in a tutorial after an operating systems lecture, and our lecturer just sat there. I mean, this man was an amazing coder. By anybody who'd looked at his stuff, just said he was legend. But he just sat up to the side and he just listened to us, and we were all talking about hardware this, hardware that, language this, language that. And after a while, he sort of interjected and said, he kind of just dropped this bomb in, saying, well, why is it that you're saying that we're going to create something and all I hear is language first, but you haven't actually talked about, well, what exactly you're going to make and what it will do and what it will, who it'll serve and so forth. You're just saying, well, I'll just have to use this language and I'll bolt my problem onto it. And he said, can I suggest to you all, he was very sagely, and said, can I, look at the lexicographical constructs of a language, and a lot of them, sort of apply irrespective of language. Some implement more of them, some implement less, or do it better or worse. But look at it that way, and understand what is it you're trying to solve first. And when you've got those two kind of bedded down, then say, all right, what would be the best language for this particular problem domain? And so, like, what he's saying is those timeless aspects first, and the cool stuff later.
Is there any tips on kind of distinguishing, especially as a new developer? It might not be clear what's a timeless thing and what's a new hotness thing. What's something that's going to be irrelevant next week? Is there any kind of like maybe some things that pretty much almost always are going to change on us?
I think as a new developer, you kind of, it's kind of a bit easier really, because all you just need to look at, say the last 10 years or last 20 years historically, and you can find, there'll be the design patterns book, there'll be the refactoring book, there'll be, the Uncle Bob's selection of books, there'll be the XP book, the growing object-oriented software, all these books that, they do really cover these sort of things. What the ones that are being created now that are going to be classics, they're going to be a bit harder to find. And I mean, even I've been developing for such a long time, but there's so many books that really are classics that I haven't read yet. I'm sort of reading the new stuff as it comes out, reading the current stuff, and also digging back in time and reading the stuff that I've missed or didn't know about. I think the sort of thing that we've sort of been touching on a bit here is that process seems to be something that's worth looking at in more depth than maybe specific tooling. And that's, I mean, you need to read the current books, the ones right now, or whatever, the blog posts or whatever on the tools that you are trying to use today. But it's the process, be that process, development process about sort of architectures or how to write code, or be it about process to try and understand the domain, or how to manage teams. There's a lot of different stuff there that may or may not apply to what you're doing. But it's the history that gives us kind of what we can use now, I think.
As a new person, I think it can be extremely overwhelming. So that's a good point, and I think maybe the easiest thing there is just to simply ask someone that has been around for a while, because you're going to make a lot of mistakes, and going and asking someone and talking, well, to several people is probably the quickest way to success. That's one of the things I wish I had done more of in the beginning, is go and ask for advice and listen to what people that have been doing this for 5 or 10 years have to say.
Yeah, definitely.
Just recommend finding a mentor. There's a whole website about finding mentors, right?
Indeed, there is.
Was it phpmentoring.com or .org?
.org, I think.
.org. Yeah. But I definitely reckon if you get a good mentor, someone who'll be patient with you, and work with you as maybe you're overly enthusiastic, and kind of will help to guide your enthusiasm. I think they're worth their weight, in the proverbial gold.
Absolutely, and I feel like one of the most important thing that's helped me in the past couple years change as a developer has been connecting to the community. And I know, man, I spent many, many years just sort of in my own little bubble thinking like, okay, this is good PHP. And I was looking at, oh my gosh, I have this website that I made in 2008 that is still running. And it's sort of like an archive page. Like I don't keep it up to date, but it's sort of like it marks a very significant moment in my life, and it stands for a lot of cool things. But I wrote it in 2008, PHP, PHP 5.2, I think, and I'm going back and actually refactoring it because I want to leave it up, but I also recognize that it's full of security holes, and I just don't want to get my server hacked. So I'm refactoring it in a way that's like it's almost like this time capsule of the way I used to think about code, and it's really crazy to think like that snapshot of how I used to code when I was in my bubble versus the way that I code now. That I've been integrated into the community and getting ideas off of people, and that I feel like has been the single most important thing to making me become a better coder is just connecting with people, like real live people, whether it's on IRC or on really user groups. Local user groups are a great way, or these conferences, these PHP conferences. Do you guys go to a lot of PHP conferences?
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say not loads of them, but I'd have to agree that social aspect definitely changes things. Lorna Jane got me into going when we worked together years ago, and it was a real turning moment. It was that same kind of, you can do so much on your own and reading books and so forth, but when you actually get in there amongst it with people, something clicks. So I was at PHP UK for I think 6 or 7 years in a row, but unfortunately didn't make it this year. So I only sort of go to 1 or 2 a year, but I definitely wouldn't go a year without one. Even if it was only one, I'd definitely have to go to at least one.
Right.
Yeah, I haven't been. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, go for it.
I haven't been to any PHP conferences in quite some time now, but that's just because of my location. I'm sort of in the middle of nowhere, and it's quite a big effort. But when I did go to PHP conferences, it was the traveling ones that the guys from PHP Architect put on, and Lone Star PHP was really good. Sunshine PHP in Florida when I still lived there, yeah, I can only recommend going there because you come back, especially when you're in a bubble, and you go there and you come back so energized just from talking to people that are into the same stuff you are, and if you don't have that in your office or where you work, then it's really, really important. So I can just totally recommend that. And then if you can't do that, which is the case for me right now, I go to user groups. So those are a little bit closer. That is on a smaller scale, but is also extremely helpful and maybe even easier because you can get into speaking there, and that's sort of the next step to keeping up to date with things, in my opinion. Is if you try to learning stuff on your own is one thing, but then when you try to teach someone that, because speaking is sort of a form of that, your understanding becomes even more, much more deeper, basically, and because you don't want to, stand up there and sound like you don't know what you're talking about. So that's I've sort of used that speaking at user groups, and now recently I spoke at my first conference in February. To sort of, pick something that I'm reasonably good at, but want to get into a lot deeper, and sort of, put myself out there and sort of force myself with a deadline. This is when you're going to talk about it, and you better know it by then. So.
Yeah, I could say pretty much the same thing. Like my first job was a bunch of WordPress work, and when I finally switched to like a firm, I actually got around people that actually knew what I was talking about, and that was like changed the whole game for me. And then also recently, I did my first talk at a user group, and so that like being able to be a speaker, like you said, you have to process the information and then be able to explain it, and that helped a lot. So I'm actually looking to do that a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, I've only been going to PHP conferences for a few years now. This thanks to Matt was the guy who dragged me along to the first PHP UK I went to, and yeah, I don't go to a lot. Again, sort of like Henning, I'm a bit out of the way, but I do try to make sure that I go to 1 or 2 a year PHP ones now. But I really don't limit it to PHP conferences. PHP conferences have got, we've sort of got a renowned, fantastic community that, you go there, familiar faces always making you feel really welcome, and it's a really, really great to interact with them. But there's also, I think, a lot of useful stuff to learn from non-PHP conferences as well. Maybe not language-specific stuff and things like that. And I'm sort of spending more time, looking at those sort of things now. And unconferences or open spaces are maybe even better again, because you, rather than sitting down and kind of watching a talk for an hour followed by another talk for an hour followed by another talk for an hour, which kind of, I find it can be really great, really educational, but it kind of also can be quite taxing to keep your attention the whole time. And it's sort of, I find the interaction with people between the talks more valuable. So having sort of events that are more like open space or something like that, where the time is more spent interacting with people, with workshops or whatever, I find the inspiration kind of goes straight through the roof when I'm
Yeah, especially when you can watch over someone's shoulder what they're doing, and that's amazing, totally amazing. And I mean, there's a lot of online things now, the Coder, what is it, coding.tv or something like that, and Twitch and things like that, but that's really, really time consuming, and you have to figure out where the good ones are, I guess. But when you just sit with someone, you talk about something that you have in common, and work with them on it, or just watch them work on it, that's totally awesome. Yeah.
I mean, just because the Uncle Bob Clean Code book's been mentioned a few times, I just sort of point out that he's also got a video series called Clean Coders, which kind of covers the topic of the book in very wacky outfits and costumes. But it's quite entertaining, depending on whether or not you want to sit through and watch them all. But one of the things that he also has there is a video series called Java Case Study, where they're kind of rebuilding their website. Him and Micah Martin, his son, are both pairing on it, and and they're talking through their discussions or their decisions. So if you're into that sort of thing, that might be worth having a look at as well.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to give a shout out to Cal Evans for doing Nomad PHP, and it's basically like if you don't have a user group and you're out in the middle of nowhere, like I think Henning and Tom, you said you guys were kind of remote. It's an excellent way of kind of getting involved in a user group. It's a virtual user group. It's been really cool. Joe Ferguson also does it. He hosts the Lightning Talks, and then they have like a big talk. So Cal and Kathy have been doing Nomad PHP with Joe Ferguson. It's a really great thing. So I highly recommend checking that out if you're not kind of close to a user group, or take Cal's advice. And if you're not close to user group, start a user group. So no pressure.
Yeah, I forgot to mention Nomad. That's something that I do fairly regularly, and I was actually lucky enough to give a lightning talk on that too. So
nice.
Yeah.
Cool.
That's a very
you go ahead.
No, I just mentioned that's a really, really great idea for people like me.
Yeah.
Because you get access to really, really good content. That's really cool.
So we've mentioned reading books, keeping up to date with books, and there was actually a dev book club that's Kruth. Shoot, I'm blanking on his first name. Jeff Kruth. Kruth?
Mm-hmm.
Kruth. I'm saying that right? Yeah. Yeah, he was doing Dev Book Club, and it looks like it hasn't been updated in a while, so I don't know if they're still doing that. But maybe we'll poke him and see if he's still gonna be doing that. But maybe having a Dev Book Club, like a local one for like a user group, and like kind of encourage people to read stuff. But we talked about reading books, having mentors, engaging regularly with the real flesh and bones people, but there's and traveling around to like various conferences and stuff, and also teaching the stuff you've learned as speaking. So we've gone through a lot of things that like kind of help us to maybe kind of to learn even more deeply the things that we're learning to stay relevant. But there's one other thing that I think, I can't remember if it was Matthew, if you had sent this to me, of ways that you stay relevant is contributing to open source projects. So do you guys do any open source, and how do you even get involved in all that?
I do a little. I'm guessing that everybody does more than I do. But it's the proverbial. I just had an itch that needed scratching. When I first did it, I admit I was very sheepish about sort of giving it, assuming that I'd get flamed or panned, submitting complete rubbish. But it wasn't the case. People were actually quite nice about it. The recent example was, I'm putting together an online course, and I expected that the code would work in a certain way. I was using an aspect of Zen SQL, and it didn't. And I think I sort of started digging into the code to find out that a function just sort of went to a dead end, which I was all surprised about. And so from there, it was just saying, okay, I worked on a patch locally until it did what I wanted, and had it covered with tests. And then I guess luckily with a lot of newer projects, but some of the bigger ones, they'll have a contributing guide. Here's how to get started with us. Here's how to fork it, create a PR, submit it, and so on. And so at least for that project, I just followed it sort of verbatim, submitted it, and then went through the feedback cycle. I think the biggest thing about it was it's great to just still be able to work with people, even if maybe, say like myself, for the most part you work remotely or you do freelance stuff. Whereas if you say worked at a company, you might have that opportunity all day long. If you sort of freelance, you may not sort of get that. So it's a great way of even just intermittently keeping up to date, getting sort of constructive feedback on how you work. So getting started, I guess, is just find a project that you maybe use regularly. So it's not like a random pick, what could I do? It's something that you would use on a semi-regular basis. And I guess hopefully, this might sound a bit bad, find like a problem with it and then make a fix for it and suggest it.
If you find a project that has, either sort of good maintainers or highly skilled maintainers or a large group of people, then it can often be quite hard to get your code through the review stage, and not that hard, but it involves a lot of toing and froing, and GitHub sort of provides a very good means for doing that, commenting on different lines on the pull request and fixing them, and then they sort of blank out and more go on. And I find that definitely, again, if you're on your own, but if you've not had much exposure beyond maybe your own work or your team, then going through that process and sort of getting a feel for the kind of how important maybe coding standards are, or different approaches to the modeling and everything, can be a really valuable experience. You just kind of you commit your code and you think you've done a really good job, and then somebody is pulling it apart, and it's not something to be upset about or anything like that. It's something you can learn a lot from. And just submitting a few pull requests to a few projects, you can really kind of level up your understanding of the importance of coding standards, and sort of understanding the project that you're working on, really.
Yeah, I feel like that's a really important point to kind of, when you contribute to open source, you have to realize that you're basically going to get a bunch of eyeballs on your code and a lot of suggestions to change. And if you go in there and thinking of your code as being a part of you, and it's like a personal thing, when anybody has any kind of anything critical to say about your code, you will probably interpret that as something critical about you. But if you have an attitude of like, okay, here's some code, I am not married to it, this is like how I think it should be done, but like, let's see what other people think, and let people tear your code to pieces, and then look at that as being good and beneficial, and be like, oh, thank you for tearing this to pieces, let me fix this and make it better. And if you go in with that attitude, I feel like you really win with open source, because it for me personally, it's literally changed the way that I program, and getting those free code reviews. Actually, Andy, you were saying the code reviews are a great way to stay relevant as well, right?
Yeah, I was actually thinking like it would be good in like the user group locally to like everybody bring their laptop or and helps people who maybe are trying to become relevant to do code reviews with maybe more experienced people. That's a thought I had.
That's a great idea.
I think there's one other thing with if you're in something so global and as say GitHub. I think if you're sort of new to it, and if you are a bit precious, it can be a bit tough at first because you get people from all sorts of backgrounds, right? And they will have different norms and customs and ways of interacting, which, if you know, it can seem kind of maybe a bit abrupt, but it's not because it's just the way that person talks. So I think it can be good on a number of levels. Yeah, sort of from a code perspective and like an interaction perspective. So I think there's a lot of benefits there.
But you probably want to go, I mean, it has not happened to me, but there are some projects where people are not very nice. I've had other people tell me that. So if you're thinking about contributing, maybe just look at the previous, the older pull requests or issues and see how people, behave and talk to each other if they're civil, and see if you think you can get, some constructive criticism and not just, people being mean, and then, submit there. If that's a project that you use and have an interest in. That's how I sort of slipped into it. It was just, again, scratching my own itch. I had a problem with something. I asked if I could, issue a pull request, and the maintainer said, yeah, sure, and it went really nicely. And I don't know if this is if there's anything like this in the PHP community at the moment or yet, but in the JavaScript community, I've heard these things come up where maintainers of projects are making the extra effort to advertise, the opportunity to make a pull request, and they want specifically someone that has never contributed to open source before to make the pull request, and they give you a very nice description on how to get started and what to do. So it's it's easier because it can be quite overwhelming on how to do all this, and how to submit things, how to document things. And that is something I think is really cool too, is that maybe go and try to find something like that where you're in a safe environment and people welcome you as a new person and wanting to learn.
Yeah, on that note, I can't actually think of any particular PHP projects that do this, but if you look through the issues list, you might see that things are tagged easy or beginner or
yeah.
See the term low-hanging fruit used as well, to something that you can just pick up and go in. Personally, I don't tend to do much of that sort of thing. I'd love to recreationally contribute to open source all the time, but time's limited. So for me, it's much more about fixing or contributing to things that I'm using, because I sort of see the benefit from it straight away, and I can verify or validate me spending that time on that. But if you can spend the time to just contribute to make things better, then fantastic, brilliant.
Yeah, there's a website up-for-grabs.net, and it's a website dedicated to just showing all these projects that have basically these issues that are already discovered and ready for somebody just to implement them or change them. And I think you can just, I'm looking at it right now. It's you can filter by like I guess PHP. Yeah, PHP. There you go. There's 12 projects in there right now, and there's just PHP Documenter is one of them. PHP Sockets, Drupal has its own thing with novice issues. So there's ways of getting involved quite easily sometimes. And actually, there was one project I was working on, and all the copyright years were out of date. So I just posted on Twitter, it was like, hey, anybody want some low-hanging fruit to change all the copyrights to 2016? And within like 10 minutes, somebody went in there, sent a pull request for all the files to be changed, and it was his first pull request. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. So, yeah, even if it's as simple as making a grammar change or changing a copyright year, it's very helpful. So, and it's a great way to stay relevant because you'll learn something from it. So, this has been a really good discussion. We do need to start wrapping it up here because we're running a little bit late on time. But I do want to give a shout out, and I totally forgot to give him a shout out in the last episode, so I apologize. But Chris Shaw has been furiously adding show notes to the show note repo. Which, by the way, Andy, who's on the panel today, is the mastermind behind creating the show notes repo. So what was your idea? When did you get that idea to make the show notes like a repo?
because I wasn't going to be able to do it all myself.
Good call. So Chris Shaw, he added show notes for episode 41, 40, 35, and 23. So holy crap. In fact, 41, as soon as he posted that, another guy, Ken Guest, submitted the show notes for 41 as well, which created the merge conflict from hell that for me. So, but I really appreciate the pull request for the show notes because we're at least the most recent episodes are all up to date with show notes, which is really awesome. So thanks Chris Shaw, thanks King Guest, and thanks Andy for the original idea of having the show notes repo. And if you'd like to contribute, just go to github.com/PHP Roundtable, and you'll see a repo in there called show-notes. And you can submit a pull request for it with a markdown file of the episode that you're submitting show notes for, and I'll totally give you a shout out. And I'll give you a shout out on the actual live broadcast and on the website itself too, just because it's awesome that you're contributing to open source and PHP Roundtable. So thanks a lot, guys. And I want to officially wrap this up with the developer shout out, and this is the segment that recognizes a developer in the community that has contributed so much and has. And we're just saying thank you so much for all your contributions. And the sponsor for this episode, or for this segment, I should say, is Laracast.com, and they're providing a $50 Amazon gift card that we can give to this awesome developer. And if you've never heard of Netflix, I was about to say if you've never heard of Netflix, if you've never heard of Laracast, it is kind of like Netflix, only it's a very nerdy Netflix where this guy Jeffrey Way sits there and just shows you all these cool things on like how to do really cool things in PHP, how to use IDEs, how to test. All these things that we're talking about, that like how do you stay relevant? Well, this is a great way to stay relevant. Laracast.com, you'll learn like the latest and greatest, even the latest and greatest tooling like Vue.js. That's like kind of the new hotness as far as tooling is concerned. So learn all this cool stuff by going to Laracast.com. So thanks Laracast for sponsoring the developer shout out. And for this episode, I asked the panel to nominate somebody who they felt like deserved the developer shout out, and I think we actually had two people, but I don't know if we officially decided who, but Henning, I think we were going with your nomination, right?
Oh, that sounds good.
Okay. Who did you nominate officially?
I nominated Raquel Velas, who is at NPM, and she's also co-hosting one of the shows that I do called Reactive. It's sort of a JavaScript-centric podcast. And she's just a really, really excellent public speaker. She does talks, obviously, on JavaScript and also robotics in the past. And not only that, but she's now, in 2016, she wants to do more mentoring and wants to get into sort of mentor relationships with people. And one of the other things that she does is if you want to start speaking at conferences, she will review your proposal and help you out because she has a lot of experience with that. And not only that, she also offered to look over your resume, things like that. So if you are trying to, because she has a lot to do with hiring at NPM, and so she has experience with that as well, and will give you tips and help you out. And she's just overall really, really nice person.
Cool, awesome. Well, thanks, Raquel, for your contributions. I'm gonna be reaching out to you to try and get your snail mail address and get this $50 Amazon gift card to you and a handwritten thank you note with a PHP Roundtable sticker. It's a really big one. I still haven't gotten rid of all these PHP Roundtable stickers that are like ridiculously huge. I didn't really realize it when I was ordering them that they basically, if you put them on your laptop and you have a 15-inch laptop, it takes up about a quarter of the entire laptop screen.
Oh my gosh.
So I recommend people put it on their laptop and then put other stickers on top of it. It's like a base sticker for other stickers to be put upon.
I'll give you my address.
Totally. Well, that basically wraps us up. So let's start off with Andy. Do you got anything that you want to shamelessly promote before we officially say goodbye?
Not at the moment. I actually am working on something that might be cool, but it's not really ready to be mentioned yet. So.
Secret.
Yeah.
All right. What about you, Henning? Do you have anything you want to promote?
Yeah, I do some podcasts, as you mentioned in the intro. The latest thing I started is called PHP Storm Briefs, and it's basically a daily 3-minute-ish podcast where I just try to explain things about PHP Storm because I'm fairly recent at using that. I'm switching from Vim as my full-time sort of editor to PHP Storm because I'm working on a lot more, larger projects, and it's just, yeah, it beats Vim in code, smarts hands down. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to document for myself and also hopefully for other people, certain things on how to make your PHP Storm usage better. And then just 2 more podcasts, reactive.audio. As I mentioned before, I'm on that with Raquel Velas and Khalil Lechert. That's pretty much just tech news, but sort of a focus on JavaScript. And then the other one that I'm on is Descriptive, and that is an interview podcast where we interview people just out of the open source community and try to get their origin stories. And one of the ones that sort of stands out for me is we interviewed Ed Finkler, which PHP people will know. That was a really, really nice interview, and he has a lot of things to say, and it was a lot of fun. So check it out.
Excellent. What about you, Matthew? Got anything you want to promote?
Two, yeah. Like Henning, a podcast. It's freethegeek.fm. It's a mix of things. It's looking at trying to help developers just in a nutshell have a good career. So it's a bit of code. It's a bit of things like conferences and sort of good books and testing and so forth. But it's more from like the broader career perspective, whether you're full time or remote worker or freelancer, so on and so forth. And the other one is the blog that I've had for ages. It's Master Zen. So obviously it's Zen framework specific, but if you want to learn something about it, definitely check it out. As of Monday, now that sort of time is becoming a bit freer, I'm planning to have like a new article out each week on sort of some aspect of the framework. And if things go well, looking to integrate screencasts and videos as well.
Nice. Awesome. What about you, Tom? Do you have anything you want to promote?
Nothing big, really. I guess one thing that I'm sort of a little bit excited about is something I've been just kind of working on due to my frustration with the long syntax of anonymous functions in PHP. I'm a big user of like array filter and array map, and I've just got this little library that's sort of just kind of there's a little bit of interest with it going on at the moment. Not a lot, but enough for me to think that it might be useful to people. It's called Transform. It's on my GitHub, PHP-Transform, I think it is. Apart from that, if anyone likes talking about this stuff, let's connect on Twitter. If I follow you back and let's share some knowledge.
Sounds good. Awesome. Well, hope you guys will join us for our next episode. We're going to be probably the next one will be all about asynchronous PHP. Interesting. And then after that, we'll be live from Lone Star PHP, talking with a bunch of nerds. We talking about going to these conferences. Well, Lone Star's coming up in a couple weekends, or a couple weeks. I don't know if it's on the weekend or week. I can't remember. Anyway, hope to see some of you guys out there. If you have something that you'd like to share on the roundtable, hit me up. I'm Sammy K on Twitter, or ping PHP Roundtable, or you can go to phproundtable.com and fill out a form that says, I got an idea, I want to do this, or I want to join the roundtable for this, and you can just join. It'll be great. So I'd like to thank Andy, Henning, Matthew, and Tom for joining us in this discussion, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.